Broken heartbroken, a divorced mom throws her last $1,000 into a creepy abandoned house no one dares to touch until she's drawn into the life of the reclusive, kind-hearted millionaire living right across the street. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A cold wind swept across the deserted street the evening Grace first arrived with her daughter Mia in the back seat of an ancient sedan. The headlights illuminated the front of the abandoned house, a once grand craftsman with a peeling porch and a broken fence that seemed to groan in complaint each time a gust of wind passed by. Grace tightened her grip on the steering wheel, swallowing the knot in her throat. It was official. Her last $1,000 had gone into this property, and she could already sense the neighbors peering from behind closed curtains, wondering who dared move into a place that had been empty for years. "Mommy, are we really going to live here?" Mia asked from the back, her voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. Grace turned around to offer a brave smile, though her heart pounded in her chest. "Yes, sweetheart. It's going to be an adventure," she said, trying to sound as confident as the women in those home renovation programs she used to watch on a borrowed TV. In truth, Grace had never felt so unsure. All she had left in her bank account was barely enough for groceries. She had parted ways with her ex-husband 6 months earlier, one of those abrupt splits that left her stunned, humiliated, and in the end, with a settlement smaller than anyone would think possible. Desperate for a fresh start and armed with a fierce determination to provide a roof for Mia, she had answered an online advertisement about an abandoned house sold at a bargain price. The real estate broker's voice still echoed in her mind. "Pay in cash and it's yours to fix up. It needs a lot of work, but it's a big property in an upscale neighborhood. Maybe you'll even catch the eye of that wealthy bachelor across the street, huh?" She had laughed politely at the time, but now, standing in the howling wind, her mind reeled at the thought of discovering who lived there and how they might regard a single mother with no money. She parked the car and stepped outside, fighting the chill that seeped into her coat. Mia clutched her teddy bear, eyes wide as she followed her mother to the porch. Each creaking floorboard and whistling breeze made the house feel more like an ancient creature exhaling a low, tired breath. Grace's keys jingled with trembling hands as she inserted the old-fashioned key into the rusted lock. It stuck for a moment until, with one forceful push, the door opened. Dust swirled inside the entryway, illuminated by the weak overhead lamp that flickered as if it hadn't been turned on in decades. The living room was cavernous, its walls marred by water stains and peeling wallpaper. Faded footprints could be seen across the grimy floorboards, evidence of past visitors or squatters. An old sofa, its cushions torn and stuffing visible, dominated the center of the room. Mia ran behind her mother, burying her face in Grace's coat. The interior had a silent heaviness, as though the walls themselves were harboring secrets from lives once lived here. Perhaps that was what drew her to it, a place as lonely and in need of revival as she felt. They settled that first evening in the only corner of the living room that seemed intact. Grace laid out a couple of blankets she had packed, creating a makeshift bed. With the door locked and the single lamp glowing weakly, she tried to pretend it was just a normal night in a normal home. But the house had other plans. Strange groans came from the pipes whenever the wind hit the siding. Occasionally, Mia would jump at the loud crack of a loose shutter banging against an upstairs window. Grace was still awake at midnight, peeking through the aged curtains, her eyes drifting across the silent neighborhood. Majestic homes with manicured lawns and decorative hedges lined the opposite side of the street. Nothing like this forlorn structure she'd just gambled her savings on. She recalled the real estate agent mentioning that on this very street lived a man who was the talk of local tabloids, a single millionaire in his early 30s, known as Donovan Price. Some said he came from old money. Others insisted he'd created a tech empire from scratch. At the moment, she could see only faint lights glowing from a large house across the road. a sprawling property with a wrought iron fence and a discreet nameplate shining under a lamp-post. Rich folks, she thought with a wistful sigh. If only life was as easy as they made it look. Yet even as she closed the curtain, she felt a flicker of determination. This was a second chance, no matter how rough it started. She whispered a prayer in the darkness, hugging Mia close while reminding herself that tomorrow she could start patching up the holes and cleaning the endless layers of dust. "I'll make this a home," she told herself, somehow. Morning arrived too early. The smell of mildew and a chill in the air forced Grace awake. She let Mia sleep a little longer while she explored the kitchen. One of the cabinet doors hung off its hinges and the faucet was squeaky, but to her relief the water at least flowed. That was more than she had expected. She sipped a cup of lukewarm instant coffee and noticed the sunlight streaming through the cracked windows, illuminating specks of dust dancing in the stale air. In that glow, the floor's scuffs and the walls' discoloration looked a bit less menacing, as if the house was allowing her a glimpse of hope. She stepped outside to take in the property's overgrown front lawn. A rickety fence marked its boundary and vines crawled up the rotting porch columns. Across the street, a sleek black sedan gleamed in a large circular driveway. Two men in tailored suits emerged to speak with someone with a distinguished silhouette, broad-shouldered, sharply dressed. Even from a distance, Grace could sense a certain quiet confidence in the way he stood. She looked away quickly, ashamed at her own curiosity. Let him keep to his side, she thought. We're just passers-by in this wealthy realm. But the hush of the morning soon broke. From the backyard, she heard Mia scream. Grace's heart lurched, and she raced around the side of the house, nearly tripping on debris. She found Mia standing near a collapsed shed, her eyes fixed on a small creature limping in the grass, a stray cat or some wounded animal. "Mom, look!" Mia said in a tear-choked voice. "She's hurt!" Grace knelt beside her daughter and extended a cautious hand toward the creature. It was indeed a young cat, muddy and trembling, with a gash on its front paw. Without hesitating, Grace scooped it up gently. "We'll help her," she said, surprising herself at the confidence in her own words. Something about this broken animal mirrored her own fractured existence. Maybe healing this kitten would be the first step toward mending her life, too. From behind the tall hedge that bordered the backyard, a masculine voice cleared its throat. Startled, Grace turned to see a man standing just beyond the property line. He was tall, dressed casually in a sweater and slacks, and wore an expression of both concern and curiosity. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, stepping closer. She recognized him from the silhouette she'd glimpsed earlier across the street. It was Donovan Price, the reclusive millionaire rumored to live in that imposing house. His gaze flicked from Grace to Mia to the wounded cat in her arms. Grace swallowed, feeling self-conscious in her rumpled clothes and dusty shoes. "We're fine," she managed, meeting his eyes. They were warm, unexpectedly kind. "Just found this little one hurt. I'm Grace," she added hastily. "I moved in yesterday." Mia clung to her leg, peering shyly at Donovan. He offered a faint smile. "I'm Donovan. I live—" He paused, gesturing. "Across the street." A small wind rustled the hedge, bringing a swirl of leaves around them. He noticed the battered house, the incomplete fence, the exhaustion in Grace's face. Then he returned his gaze to the trembling cat. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Grace opened her mouth, unsure how to respond. Pride warred with desperation. She barely had enough to feed Mia, let alone pay for a vet. But the cat needed help. "She's hurt badly," she admitted softly. I'm not sure where the nearest vet is or if I can afford—" Her words faltered, shame creeping up her neck like a fever. Donovan nodded, stepping carefully over the property line. "There's a vet clinic a few miles away. They know me there. If you'd like, I can drive you and Mia, make sure she gets treated." The generosity in his voice startled Grace. all her preconceived notions about a cold, distant millionaire vanished in that moment. She sensed genuine compassion in his offer. Before she could overthink it, she found herself accepting. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." As Grace cradled the small cat closer, she noticed Donovan's calm, steady presence. Perhaps not everyone in this wealthy circle was as indifferent as she'd assumed. A swirl of hope mingled with uncertainty in her chest. One thing was certain. Her new life in this abandoned house had already taken an unexpected turn, and she wasn't sure if she should trust fate or run from it. Grace could feel her heart racing as she carefully placed the injured cat in a lined shoebox for travel. The morning sun was higher now, and the breeze had settled into a soft hush, as if the entire neighborhood were holding its breath to see what would happen next. Across the street, Donovan Price's sleek SUV purred in the driveway, waiting for its unexpected passengers. Grace had only known him for a few minutes, yet here she was, trusting him enough to drive her and Mia to the nearest veterinary clinic. Mia's eyes darted nervously from the shoebox cradled in her mother's arms to Donovan, who stood at the open passenger door, gesturing for them to get in. He spoke quietly, reassuringly, as though trying not to scare the wounded cat. "There's a warm blanket in the back seat," he said, his deep voice resonating confidence. "We can set her there for the ride." Grace settled Mia first, helping her climb onto the plush seat. She set the shoebox gently on Mia's lap, so her daughter could keep watch over the cat. Then Grace climbed in beside her, pressing her back against the leather seat that smelled faintly of pine and some expensive cologne. Donovan closed the door carefully before walking around to the driver's side. As the engine revved, Grace marveled at how smoothly the vehicle glided onto the street, a sharp contrast to her sputtering old sedan back in the driveway. "It's the Evergreen Vet Clinic, right?" Donovan asked, glancing at Grace in the rearview mirror. She nodded, unsure of how to respond beyond that. Despite the kindness he'd already shown, a part of her still felt self-conscious. She couldn't stop thinking about how unkempt her hair was, or how her clothes were dusty from the old house. Would he judge her for plunging all her savings into that crumbling property? Traffic was light, giving Grace time to notice more details about Donovan. He wore a simple crew-neck sweater and well-fitted pants, the type of understated style that quietly whispered money. Though his eyes were fixed on the road, he occasionally glanced back to check on Mia and the cat, each time offering a small, supportive smile. They exchanged few words during the drive, but an odd sense of calm settled over Grace. She was grateful for this moment, for someone stepping in to help when she had been so used to facing things alone. Mia, curious as ever, piped up from the back seat. "Mommy says the house we bought is really old," she said, carefully stroking the cat's head. "Do you know anything about it?" The question hung in the air, and Grace shifted uneasily. She wasn't sure if she wanted Donovan's opinion, especially when she felt so uncertain herself. Donovan glanced back. "I know it's been abandoned for a while," he answered gently. "Some people claimed it needed too many repairs. Others said it had history. But that's mostly talk." He hesitated, seeming to weigh his words. "Is that what you heard before buying it?" Grace cleared her throat, trying to maintain an air of confidence she didn't quite feel. "I only heard it was a fixer-upper going for a good price," she said softly, "and it was all I could afford." She hesitated, then added, "I'm just glad there's a roof over our heads." Though Donovan didn't say anything, Grace saw the flicker of empathy in his eyes through the mirror. She wondered if he caught the tremor in her voice. The conversation tapered off, and the rest of the ride continued in a thoughtful silence. The clinic sat on a small hill, surrounded by pine trees that cast long shadows over the parking lot. Donovan pulled into a reserved space, and before Grace could insist otherwise, he hopped out to help. Inside, the waiting area was bright and clean, with pastel-colored walls decorated with cheerful paintings of dogs and cats. Almost immediately, a veterinarian's assistant hurried over when Donovan explained the situation, calling them into an exam room. As the vet, a kindly woman named Dr. Holden, examined the cat's paw, Grace hovered beside the table, biting her lower lip. Mia waited in a corner chair, hugging her teddy bear. Donovan observed from a polite distance, letting the professionals work without hovering. When Dr. Holden finally stood upright, pulling off her gloves, Grace braced herself. She had seen more than enough bills in her life to know what a vet charge might look like. "There's a nasty cut, but we can clean it and stitch it," Dr. Holden explained. "She might need a few days of antibiotics. It's nothing too serious, fortunately." Relief washed over Grace. Relief tainted with dread. There was no question in her mind about whether she'd pay. This innocent creature needed care. But how? Her internal battle must have been obvious, because Donovan rested a hand lightly on Grace's shoulder. "I'll handle it," he said quietly, as if reading her mind. Before she could protest, he added, "Consider it my welcome to the neighborhood gift. You're doing a good thing, saving a little life. Let me support that." Grace's instinct was to argue, to insist she could manage, but she couldn't ignore that she genuinely lacked the funds. So she simply nodded in mute gratitude, her cheeks growing hot at the kindness of a near stranger. Even so, she felt a flicker of guilt, as though she were accepting charity. A part of her worried that this moment of generosity might have consequences, like owing a debt she'd never be able to repay. Once the paperwork and treatments were done, Dr. Holden arranged for the cat to stay overnight for observation. Mia looked heartbroken to leave the cat behind, but the vet reassured them that it was the best way for the paw to heal properly. On the drive back, Donovan broke the silence. "We can pick her up tomorrow once the stitches are done," he said. "I have a feeling you two will be great caretakers." Mia beamed, though her eyes were still a bit misty. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she said in a small voice. "We'll make a special place for her in our new house. Right, Mommy?" Grace managed a genuine smile. "That's right," she said, glancing out the window as they passed pristine suburban lawns. Her mind wandered to the tremendous amount of work waiting at the house. Broken windows, chipped paint, unknown plumbing nightmares. And yet, for the first time, she felt a spark of optimism. Maybe she could do this. When Donovan turned onto their street, Grace noticed something unsettling. Her battered sedan's hood was raised, and a figure stood next to it, fiddling with the engine. At first, she thought it might be a helpful neighbor. But as the SUV drew nearer, she recognized the stooped shoulders and the messy brown hair of her ex-husband, Trent. Her throat tightened. She had not given him this address, nor had she expected him to care about her living situation. As Donovan pulled up to the curb, Trent looked up from under the hood. His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance at the sight of Donovan driving Grace around in a fancy SUV. The tension was immediate. Grace opened the car door with trembling hands, stepping onto the cracked pavement. "Trent, what are you doing here?" Mia hopped out behind her, silent as she gripped her mother's coat. Meanwhile, Donovan lingered by the driver's side, obviously uncertain whether to intervene. Trent shrugged, wiping his hands on an oily rag. "Car was unlocked. Thought I could fix some of the issues since you're obviously broke." His tone dripped with condescension. "And then here you come, strolling in with Prince Charming." Grace stiffened at his sarcasm, her face flushing. She tried to steady her voice. "He helped us take an injured cat to the vet, that's all." Trent cast a scornful glance at Donovan, who stood tall, hands calmly resting in his pockets. "Right," Trent scoffed, "because random rich guys always drive struggling single moms around for free, with no motive." "Excuse me," Donovan interjected politely but firmly. "I was just trying to be neighborly." Trent snapped the hood shut with a clang that reverberated down the street. "Well, neighbor, I was finishing up here. Since I'm still Mia's father, I figured I'd check on them. Make sure they weren't..." Getting scammed. Grace's patience frayed at the edges. She noticed a few curtains parting from nearby windows, so the neighborhood was watching all right. And how must she look now? A single mom in a half-ruined house with an ex-husband prowling about, and a wealthy neighbor caught in the middle. She swallowed her anger, not wanting to start a loud altercation in front of Mia or the entire block. "Thank you for the concern," she managed, "but I can handle things." Trent snorted. "Sure you can." He glared at Donovan once more before grabbing a small toolkit off the front seat of Grace's car. "Next time, lock this junk heap," he warned as he brushed past her toward the sidewalk. "People might get the wrong idea." With that, he trudged off, offering no apology, no farewell to Mia. Grace watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest from the confrontation. She felt Mia's small hand slip into hers, warm and reassuring. "Are you okay?" Donovan asked, stepping closer. His voice was quiet, the concern in his gaze unmistakable. Grace exhaled, finding it hard to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. You didn't need to see that. He just shows up sometimes." Donovan's expression softened, and for a fleeting moment Grace thought she saw deeper empathy, almost a protectiveness that she hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. "You don't owe me any explanation," he said, "but if there's anything you need, you can ask." Grace blinked back sudden tears. She was tired of feeling alone in her struggles, yet she hardly knew this man. Despite his generosity, how could she trust that he wouldn't just walk away like Trent had, or use her weaknesses against her? Still, the sincerity in Donovan's voice made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone was out to hurt her. She managed a small nod. "Thank you. I might take you up on that someday," she whispered. Her gaze shifted to the tattered house behind her. Even though it was a wreck, it was hers, her second chance. "Right now, I think I'll focus on making this place livable." She tried for a brave smile, feeling more tears threaten to escape. "So Mia can have a home again." Donovan returned the smile, placing a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder. "Well, if you need a toolbox or a recommendation for a good handyman, you know where I live." With that, he walked back to his SUV, leaving Grace and Mia alone in the driveway. The late afternoon sun felt warmer, as if the gloom of the morning had cleared. Despite her humiliation at Trent's outburst, despite the monumental work that lay ahead, a cautious sense of hope wound its way through Grace's heart. She watched Donovan's vehicle pull into his driveway across the street, then turned to Mia. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go see what kind of improvements we can start inside." As they climbed the worn porch steps and disappeared behind the sagging front door, Grace felt something stirring deep within her. She didn't realize it yet, but a subtle bond had been formed, one that would soon test her ability to trust, heal, and love again. Morning light found its way through the cracks of the sagging front door, rousing Grace from an uneasy sleep on a makeshift mattress of blankets in the living room. Mia curled up against her side, softly breathing, still lost in childhood dreams. The faint sounds of traffic and the hum of distant lawnmowers reminded Grace that beyond these walls was a neighborhood whose life she had barely begun to glimpse. She felt her back ache. The house's uneven floor had no mercy for a tired single mother, and she wondered how soon she might scrounge enough funds for a real bed. But for now, gratitude prevailed. They had a roof. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Slipping carefully from the blankets, she grabbed a tattered sweater and tiptoed outside, letting Mia continue to rest. The porch greeted her with the same loose floorboard that nearly tripped her the day before. She stepped over it, eyes drifting across the deserted lawn. A battered mailbox leaned precariously as if waiting for a strong wind to knock it over. At the end of the driveway, Grace's car stood, hood lowered now, thanks to Trent's meddling. She brushed away a swell of frustration at the memory of how he'd stormed off the previous day, leaving behind a bitter taste that lingered in the air. Still, the drama from last afternoon seemed oddly distant in the gentle light of this new day. As if sensing her presence, a door across the street opened. Donovan Price appeared on his stoop, coffee mug in hand. Even from this distance, Grace could sense his quiet composure, as though a swirl of unspoken secrets surrounded him, yet his exterior remained effortlessly calm. For a moment they caught each other's gaze across the expanse of pavement and unkempt grass. He lifted his mug in a silent greeting, and she responded with a small wave. A flush of self-consciousness warmed her cheeks. She was sure she looked disheveled, hair askew, old sweater full of lint. But Donovan merely tilted his head in acknowledgement, then stepped away, likely heading back inside to begin his morning routine. Grace exhaled, wondering how anyone could maintain such a polished air. She shrugged off the thought and returned to the living room to gently wake Mia. They shared a sparse breakfast of cereal and milk, seated on the living room floor, the single lamp lighting the gloom. The fridge they'd salvaged from a second-hand store needed cleaning before they could fully use it, and the rest of the kitchen was a minefield of broken tiles and old wires. Still, Mia slurped happily, chattering about how excited she was to pick up their new furry friend from the vet. "Mr. Donovan said the kitty can come home today." Mia grinned, wiping milk from her chin with the back of her hand. "Are we going soon, Mommy? I want to set up a comfy spot for her." Grace smiled softly. "Yes, right after we clean the kitchen a bit. The vet said mid-afternoon, so let's see how much we can fix before then." They started with the cupboards, clearing out crumbling shelf liners and faded insect traps. Mia volunteered to hand Grace tools while perched on a sturdy old stool. Together they discovered that some of the wooden boards were salvageable with a good scrub and a fresh coat of paint. The rest needed replacing. As they worked, Grace's mind flicked back to Donovan's offer of help. She pictured him stepping through the threshold with a gentle smile, brandishing tools or sharing the name of a reliable handyman. Yet her pride itched at the thought of leaning too much on a near stranger, and she could almost hear Trent's sneer, "What's his real motive?" She pushed that negativity aside. Donovan had been nothing but kind. Sometimes kindness was just kindness, no strings attached. Around noon, sunlight glinted off the cracked window overlooking the street. Grace paused to catch her breath, wiping dust from her cheeks. She caught sight of movement outside, a delivery truck parked in front of Donovan's house. A man in a crisp uniform hopped out, hefting a large package. Perhaps Donovan had some fancy gadget on order, a reflection of the comfortable life he led. And yet, Grace remained half-hidden behind her grimy window, a reluctant observer of a world that felt leagues away from her own. Minutes later, the doorbell's faint ring startled them both. Grace exchanged a look with Mia, heart pounding. She wasn't expecting anyone else, especially not at midday. "Mommy, do you think it's Dad?" Mia whispered, eyes wide. Grace frowned. She doubted Trent would show up unannounced again so soon, but she couldn't be sure. "Stay here," she murmured, heading carefully to the door. She opened it to find a teenage boy, likely 14 or 15, standing on the porch wearing paint-stained jeans and a determined expression. He cleared his throat. Hi. Sorry to bother you. I'm Alex from across the block." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. I noticed you and your daughter cleaning up yesterday, and I do odd jobs for some folks around here. Thought maybe you could use some help?" Grace felt the tension in her shoulders relax. She had expected trouble, yet here stood a polite young neighbor she had never met offering his labor. She blinked. "Oh, that's nice of you, Alex, but I'm not sure I can pay much right now." He shrugged, shifting from foot to foot. "Honestly, I mostly do it for the practice. My uncle's in construction. I've learned a bit about painting and basic repairs. You might just need to cover some supplies if I run out. But—" He glanced over her shoulder into the dim hallway. "It looks like there's a lot to do, so maybe we can work out a small rate later if you want." A wave of gratitude and uncertainty washed over Grace. First Donovan, now this helpful teenager. Was the entire neighborhood brimming with good Samaritans, or had the sight of her struggling awakened some collective pity? Either way, it was better to swallow her pride than to keep living in a house of hazards. "Thank you, Alex. That would be great. Would you like to take a look around? We can see what's most urgent." Alex nodded eagerly. He followed Grace through the battered living room and into the kitchen where Mia perched on her stool, eyeing him with a shy curiosity. "This is Mia, my daughter," Grace introduced. "We're trying to tackle the cabinets and maybe do something about the broken window." Alex ran a hand along the worn countertops. "Well, first thing I'd do is close off that gap in the window frame. Otherwise, you'll let in more cold air than you want. I can measure it up, get a piece of glass cut down at the hardware store." He grinned, adding, "I'll ask for offcuts so it might be cheaper." Grace liked the sound of that. "Thank you," she repeated, meaning it more than he could know. He nodded and set about taking pictures on his phone for reference. "I'll swing by the hardware place after lunch. I can bring receipts so you know how much everything costs." Once he'd stepped out, promising to return soon, Grace pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed by a swirl of relief and caution. She glanced at Mia, who was kneeling on the floor, reorganizing the minimal cleaning supplies. "We might actually fix this house up," Grace said gently, trying to believe her own words. By mid-afternoon, Grace and Mia headed to the vet clinic. They took Grace's old sedan, which coughed and sputtered but managed the short trip. The windows were rolled down to chase away the lingering smell of dust from inside the car. When they arrived, the waiting area was lively. Cats in carriers, a boisterous Labrador wagging his tail. Dr. Holden soon appeared, greeting Mia with a warm smile. "Your furry friend is doing well," she announced, leading them to the back. The small cat was nestled in a crate, paw bandaged, eyes bright with curiosity. Mia squealed softly, pressing her face to the crate door. Grace knelt down. "Look at you," she whispered, heart swelling at the sight of the cat's gentle gaze. "You're all patched up now. Ready to come home?" They signed a few forms. Grace tried to steady her fingers as she wrote her name, anxiety creeping in at the idea of the cost. But when she checked the bill, a note in crisp handwriting read, "Paid in full, Donovan Price." Her throat tightened. He had gone through with his promise entirely. No partial cost to her, no mention of repayment. On the drive back, Mia insisted on holding the crate on her lap, despite the cat's soft meows of protest. "She'll love our new house, won't she, Mommy?" Mia asked, beaming. "We can keep her cozy while her paw heals." Grace glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, eyes full of hope. That alone made the battered car and rickety house worthwhile. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "We'll give her a good home, even if it's still a bit rough around the edges." When they arrived, they found Alex already on the porch, measuring the broken window. "I was just about to text you," he said, waving. "Figured I'd get started so I can put in the new glass tomorrow." Grace let Mia rush inside with the cat's crate. Then she joined Alex, who was prying away old rotting wood from the window frame. He showed her a short list of supplies. "I can head back out again, but I'm a little short on bus fare," he admitted sheepishly. Nodding, Grace managed a small laugh as she dug through her purse for a few loose bills. "I appreciate this, Alex. Really." He took the money with a friendly grin. "I'll be back soon. Promise I won't overspend." As he left, Grace carried the cat crate to the living room, where Mia had assembled a makeshift bed, a large folded blanket, a small bowl of water, and some scraps of leftover chicken in a saucer. The cat blinked gratefully, stepping gingerly on the bandaged paw. Mia cooed with excitement. Grace eased onto the floor, exhaustion seeping into her bones. She became aware of how, in just 24 hours, the threads of her life had tangled unexpectedly with new faces. Alex, Dr. Holden, Donovan. Each had shown up at the right time, offering help, even if she wasn't entirely sure how to accept it graciously. The sun sank lower, painting the living room walls in warm yellows. That's when Grace heard a light knock on the front door, timid, as though the visitor wasn't sure if it was okay to disturb. Grace exchanged a questioning look with Mia, then rose to answer it. Standing on the porch, arms full of brown paper bags, was Donovan Price. He offered a gentle, almost shy smile. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said quietly. "I brought some groceries, just a few basics. It's not much, but I remembered how hectic moving days can be." He shifted, looking genuinely uncertain. Grace's mouth went dry. There it was again, his kindness, both humbling and unnerving. Pride told her to push the offer away. The practical mother in her knew it was an absolute blessing right now. She swallowed, stepping aside so he could bring the bags in. "Thank you," she murmured, voice unsteady. "You really didn't have to." Donovan set the bags carefully on the dusty kitchen counter. He spotted the cat, curled next to Mia's foot, and his face lit with relief. "Seems like she's doing well," he said softly. "I'm glad." He started to back away, perhaps sensing that Grace might feel awkward. "I won't stay long," he added, gesturing to the groceries. "There's some fresh fruit, soup, bread. I know the fridge might not be at its best, so I avoided stuff that spoils quickly." Grace's eyes welled, though she tried desperately to keep her emotions in check. She offered the best smile she could manage without crumbling. "That was really thoughtful," she said. "Thank you." He nodded, hands slipping into his pockets. "If you or Mia ever need anything, tools, a ride, advice on local services, just let me know. I'm right across the street." Grace opened her mouth to reply, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she found herself taking a hesitant step forward, bridging the space between them. "Donovan, before you go, I'm sorry about the scene with Trent yesterday. I'm just sorry you got pulled into that." Donovan studied her face, warmth in his gaze. "You don't have to apologize," he said gently. "We all have pasts. Some are more complicated than others." A long moment passed, shared in the dim glow of the sinking sun. For the briefest instant, Grace thought he might reach out to touch her arm, to offer comfort. But he stayed still, as though sensing that closeness could be too much, too soon. At last, he gave a small wave to Mia and the cat, who watched from the living room. "Have a good night," he said. "Take care of yourselves." Then, with a calmness that both reassured and unsettled Grace, he stepped back outside and closed the door quietly behind him. She stood there for several long seconds, the hush of the house pressing in. Mia's soft laughter broke the silence. She was playing with the cat, gently wiggling a shoestring for it to swat at. The simple scene pulled Grace's heart in two directions: joy for this small moment of normalcy, and an ache for how foreign safety and kindness had become to her. But as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving only the faint glow of the living room lamp, Grace inhaled and let hope settle deeper into her chest. This house might be broken, but little by little, the cracks were starting to fill, through new friendships, unexpected generosity, and the tentative promise that she and Mia were, at last, on the path to rebuilding a life worth living. Sleep for Grace had become a seesaw between hope and anxiety. Each night she'd lay awake on her makeshift bedding, listening to the house groan around her, pipes settling, floorboards creaking, windows rattling in the wind, and yet she couldn't ignore how her spirits felt lighter ever since Donovan's unexpected acts of kindness. The groceries he had dropped off were still lined up on the kitchen counter, too new and clean for the dusty surroundings. On this particular morning, Grace awoke before dawn. The sky outside the broken window was a purple hue, hinting at a crisp, cold day ahead. She rose quietly so as not to wake Mia, who slept soundly in a nest of blankets with the cat curled at her feet. The cat's bandaged paw was healing well, but the rest of the house was another story. Determined to make more progress, Grace slipped on a hoodie and stepped into the kitchen. Her breath puffed in little clouds. The heater only half worked, and the chills seemed to seep from every corner of the floor. She made herself instant coffee, grateful for Donovan's thoughtful additions, creamer and sugar. Sipping the steaming cup, she peered through the fractured glass, noticing a faint light in Donovan's house. Across the street, a single lamp glowed, presumably from one of his upstairs windows. The sight gave her a fleeting sense of connection. Even though a wide road, a tangle of finances, and a stark difference in living conditions separated them, at least one other person was awake this early. By the time Mia stirred, the sun had fully risen, painting the battered living room in a warm glow. "Mommy, is Alex coming back today?" she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She reached down to scratch the cat's chin, earning a soft purr. Grace bent to kiss the top of Mia's head. "He said he'd come by this morning to finish installing the new window glass," she reminded her daughter. "If it fits right, we'll have a proper window again." As if summoned by her words, a soft knock sounded on the door. Grace opened it to find Alex outside, balancing a pane of newly cut glass, plus a roll of plastic sheeting under one arm. "Good morning," he greeted, voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his neck. "Mind if I get started?" "Not at all." Grace stepped aside. "Come on in, just be careful with those floorboards." Alex smiled confidently. "I've got it. I also brought a better set of tools," he added, lifting a small duffel bag with his free hand. He got to work, removing the old shards from the window frame and easing in the fresh glass. Mia hovered at a safe distance, fascinated by the process. Occasionally, Alex offered a quick explanation, like how to seal the edges or check if the frame was even. Grace couldn't help feeling grateful that this teenager, almost a stranger, was devoting his time to help. She stepped into the kitchen to heat water for tea, hoping to offer him something warm in return. As she waited for the kettle to boil, Grace heard another car pull up. She tensed. Could it be Trent again, arriving unannounced with more sneers and judgments? Or was it Donovan checking in on them? Nervous, she peeked out and recognized neither vehicle nor driver. Instead, she saw a woman in her late 40s, hair meticulously styled, dressed in a tailored jacket and expensive heels ill-suited for the cracked sidewalk. Clutching a clipboard, the woman ascended the porch steps with a stern expression. Grace met her at the threshold. "Hello?" she ventured, uncertain. The woman cast a quick glance around the interior of the house, her nose wrinkling slightly at the state of disrepair. "Mrs. Bowers?" she asked in a crisp tone. "I'm Susan DeWitt, from Child Protective Services. We've had a report that you and your daughter might be living in unsafe conditions." Grace's pulse drummed in her ears. Her initial reaction was outrage. Who would report her? Then fear set in, deep and cold. "Excuse me?" she managed. "Unsafe conditions? We only moved in a few days ago." Susan DeWitt didn't flinch. "We received an anonymous call expressing concern about the structural safety of the home and whether you have appropriate facilities for a child." Before Grace could formulate a calm response, Alex came around the corner, carrying a caulking gun. He immediately sensed the tension and took a careful step back, offering Grace a concerned glance. Meanwhile, Mia peeked out from behind the couch, wide-eyed at the stranger's brusque tone. Grace cleared her throat, trying to maintain composure. "I assure you, we're fixing it up. My daughter is fine. There's food, heat, well, partial heat, and we're making repairs every day." "Who said it was unsafe?" Susan DeWitt scanned the living room, noticing the old blankets on the floor, the chipped paint, the replaced window. She checked boxes on her clipboard, glancing toward Mia. "Ma'am, I'm not here to take your child away," she said coolly, as though reading Grace's fear. "However, I do have to ensure Mia's welfare." The caller indicated they were a concerned relative. Grace's heart dropped. A relative? That had to be Trent. She felt fury flare inside her, tinged with raw betrayal. Of all the ways he could punish her, accusing her of endangering Mia, she forced herself to speak calmly. We're safe here. I used what savings I had to buy this house, and yes, it needs work. But Mia is well fed. She has a warm place to sleep, and she's going to school, which I can prove. I'm doing my best." Susan nodded in a perfunctory way. "I'd like to walk through if you don't mind." It was more a statement than a question. Grace felt her cheeks burning, but she stepped aside, letting the social worker pass. For the next few minutes, Susan inspected each room, jotting notes, occasionally questioning how long Grace expected renovations to take. She asked about the heater, the electricity, the condition of the plumbing. Alex stayed near the front window, quietly returning to his work, but listening intently. Mia hovered close to her mother. Eventually, Susan wrapped up her observations, turning to Grace at the front door. "The house is undeniably in disrepair, but I see evidence that you're improving it. I also see that Mia seems healthy and not at immediate risk. However, I'll need to file an official report. If it's determined that the environment is unsuitable, we may revisit. Until then, I recommend you expedite critical repairs, especially any issues that could pose a hazard to your daughter's safety." Grace nodded, chest tight. "Understood," she replied, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. "We're working on it. I promise." Susan left with a polite but distant nod, her heels tapping across the porch. Grace closed the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling a tremulous breath. Mia looked up, brow furrowed with worry. "Mommy, am I in trouble?" Grace managed a small, reassuring smile, kneeling to hug her daughter. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble at all. Mommy just needs to make this house nice and safe, okay? And we will. Everything will be fine." Alex quietly set down his tools. "I'm sorry," he said. "That sounded intense. Anything I can do?" She swallowed, tears threatening. It was mortifying to have a CPS worker in her home. "If you can help me finish the window, that'd be great," she said, forcing a steadiness into her tone. "And maybe keep an eye out for any other hazards. I really need everything in better shape, sooner rather than later." He nodded, giving her a thumbs up before returning to the broken frame. As she tried to steady her heartbeat, she realized that if Trent was indeed behind this complaint, it meant more trouble could come. He wouldn't hesitate to sabotage her new start. The thought ignited a fierce protective instinct deep in her chest. She'd already lost so much, her marriage, her security. She refused to lose her daughter's sense of home. By noon, Alex had installed the new window pane successfully. Sunlight now streamed into the living room without the whistling draft. Mia clapped her hands, delighted with the improvement. Alex packed up his supplies, then handed Grace the receipt for the glass. It was more than she had hoped, but he'd done top-notch work, and she paid him with what little she had left. "Hey, if you need me tomorrow, I'm free after school," Alex offered, wrapping up the leftover plastic. Grace smiled, though she felt the weight of finances pressing on her mind. "I appreciate that. We might need help fixing a leaky pipe in the kitchen sink if you're up for it." "Sure thing," he replied, heading out with a friendly wave. Once he was gone, Grace sat on the sofa's bare frame. She'd stripped the ruined cushions earlier, trying to gather herself. She looked at the crisp, undamaged window, letting its beam of sunlight warm her face. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The cat padded over, rubbing against her legs. She picked it up, gently stroking its fur. "We need a name for you, she whispered. The cat purred, eyelids fluttering contentedly. Mia bounced over, excited by the topic. They tossed a few ideas around: Snowflake, even though the cat was a dusky gray; Patches, though she had no real patches; or maybe Lucky, because of the rescue. Eventually, Mia settled on Clover because, she said, we could use some good luck. Late in the afternoon, Grace heard another rap on the door. This time she expected Alex, or maybe a delivery person. But when she opened it, Donovan stood there, concern evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry. Alex mentioned a social worker came by?" he asked, words subdued. I wanted to see if everything's okay." The immediate warmth and worry in his gaze nearly undid her. She clutched the doorknob, nodding. "We're fine," she said, then realized how tense her voice sounded. "I guess my ex-husband thought it'd be clever to report me. The worker said things are borderline, but not enough to remove Mia. As long as we keep up repairs, we should be okay." Donovan's jaw set, a spark of frustration crossing his face. "That's cruel," he murmured. "But you'll get through it. Let me know if you need help. Any kind of contractor or bigger repairs. I know people." She bit her lip, her heart swelling at the offer. Part of her wanted to say yes, please fix everything. Another part wanted to stand on her own feet. In the end, the mother in her won out. "I might take you up on some handyman references," she admitted. "I'm realizing time is of the essence. I can't let anyone claim Mia's not safe here." He nodded understandingly. "I'll see who I can call. There's a family-owned business I trust. They won't charge you a fortune." He paused as if considering his next words. "And if the cost is still too high, we'll figure something out. I promise." Grace's throat tightened with gratitude and unease. "You've already done so much," she began, but he gently lifted a hand as though to halt any protest. "Just let me help this once so you don't have to worry about Mia's safety," he said. "We can argue about your independence later," he added, flashing a small, teasing smile. A surprising laugh bubbled in Grace's chest, easing the day's tension. The exchange felt so simple, so natural, but it meant the world to her. She realized that behind Donovan's quiet demeanor was a steady resolve, someone who wouldn't waver if he decided to care about something, or someone. They spoke a few more minutes, discussing the most urgent repairs and potential costs, before Donovan took his leave. As she closed the door behind him, Grace tried to quell the mix of relief and worry swirling inside her. It had been only days since she moved into this broken old house, and already her life was turning upside down. With a deep breath, she looked across the living room, where Mia sat drawing pictures of the cat next to a newly fitted window. Yes, it was a mess. Yes, she was nearly broke, and a social worker had just threatened the stability of their home. But the resilience in her chest refused to shrink. Every day there were small victories, a repaired window, a blossoming friendship, a vow of help from a new neighbor. Little by little, she was learning that acceptance of kindness could coexist with fierce self-reliance. And perhaps that was the real lesson this old house was teaching her, that sometimes we build ourselves back up fastest when we're willing to let others lend a hand. Grace woke up to the sound of hammering from somewhere outside. Disoriented, she blinked, taking in the living room with its newly installed window. A thin rectangle of light crossed the floor, shining on the rumpled blankets where she and Mia had dozed off after another late night of cleaning. The gentle purr of Clover, the gray cat, was her reassurance that morning had indeed arrived, ready or not. When she checked her phone, Grace realized that it was already past 8. She must have been more exhausted than she thought. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she stood and tiptoed over to gently shake Mia's shoulder. "Time to get up, sweetheart." Mia stirred, her hair a nest of tangles. "What's that noise?" she asked, yawning. "Someone's doing work outside," Grace replied, though she felt a swirl of concern. Alex was scheduled to come after school hours. Donovan had said he would send references for contractors, but none had confirmed an arrival time yet. She hoped it wasn't Trent returning unannounced, ready to pick another fight or stir up drama. After quickly washing her face in the bathroom sink, still an awkward chore with half the pipes leaking, Grace stepped onto the porch, bracing against the crisp morning air. The hammering was indeed close by, so she peered around the side of the house. To her surprise, she saw a middle-aged man in jeans and a paint-stained work shirt, kneeling near a pile of lumber. A white van was parked beside the curb with the words, "Blue Pine Handyman Services," stenciled along the side. When the man noticed her, he set his hammer down and lifted a hand in a wave. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice carrying easily in the still air. "I'm Ray Coleman. Donovan Price mentioned you might need some urgent repairs." Grace felt a trickle of relief mixed with curiosity. She walked closer, stepping cautiously on the uneven ground. "Oh, yes, Donovan said he knew someone. Good morning, I'm Grace." She offered a tentative smile. "I didn't expect you so early." "Earlier we start, the more we can get done," Ray responded with a friendly shrug. "Mr. Price gave me a short list of your biggest concerns. Figured I'd take a look at the foundation near the front steps, then maybe see about the wobbly porch railing. And the main floor needs patching, from what I hear." Grace's eyes widened. She glanced at the battered, sagging porch, recalling how many times her foot nearly went through a loose board. She nodded, a weight lifting off her shoulders. "That's correct. But well..." She hesitated, thinking about costs, how her funds were almost depleted. "I hope you can give me an estimate before anything else. My budget is extremely limited." Ray pursed his lips thoughtfully. "Donovan mentioned that. We'll figure something out. I run a small team and sometimes we take on smaller jobs for folks in need. Let's see what we're dealing with first, then talk numbers." He offered a warm smile that reminded her of a kindly uncle. "Don't worry, we're not here to gouge you." Touched by his sincerity, Grace exhaled the tension she'd been holding in. "Thank you. That means a lot." She led him around the side of the house, pointing out areas of rotted siding, the cracked walkway, and the precarious porch steps. At each stop, Ray knelt, took measurements, or tapped gently with a small rubber mallet, listening for telltale echoes of hidden damage. Mia peeked out from the living room window, still in her pajamas, waving shyly whenever Ray looked her way. They returned to the porch to finalize the initial list of priorities. Ray jotted everything on a notepad, then showed it to Grace. "This is what I propose. Reinforce the porch foundation, fix the rotted floorboards inside, patch the biggest holes in the siding. Those steps alone will make the house safer and more livable." Then he ran a hand along the back of his neck, adding, "As for cost, let me see if I can source some reclaimed wood. That'll keep expenses down." Grace glanced at his notes, feeling both optimistic and anxious. "How much time do you think this will take?" she asked. "If my team starts tomorrow, maybe a week or two for the basics," Ray replied. "That's if we don't find any major surprises. You never really know with old houses." He caught her worried expression and gave a small chuckle. "But hey, I've seen worse. This place has good bones, I promise." She thanked him, promising to talk about scheduling once she'd checked her finances. He packed up his tools and left with the notepad under his arm, promising to call once he had a ballpark figure for supplies. As she watched his van drive off, Grace leaned against the porch railing, still precarious but stable enough for a moment's rest. The day had barely begun, and yet she felt she'd already taken another giant leap forward. The looming presence of Child Protective Services hovered in the back of her mind, urging her to press on. Back inside, she discovered Mia and Clover playing with a length of string. Mia grinned. "Is Mr. Ray gonna fix our porch?" she asked brightly. "Looks like it," Grace said, smiling at her daughter's excitement. "He'll bring a team. They'll make everything more solid and safe." She glanced at the bare living room floor, scattered with bits of old carpet padding she had ripped out the previous night. "We'll do our part inside. I'll keep pulling up the rest of that carpet so the workers can see the floorboards more clearly." They spent the next couple of hours in a flurry of activity. Grace crouched and used a utility knife to cut away strips of decaying carpet, revealing splintered wood beneath. Mia helped in her own way, carefully handing her mother trash bags and making sure Clover stayed clear of any sharp tacks. At one point, Grace found an old newspaper sandwiched between the subfloor and the carpet padding. The date was nearly 20 years ago, and the headlines spoke of local elections, new neighborhood developments. She wondered about the house's previous occupants, what their lives had been like before everything fell into disrepair. By midday, she and Mia were dusty and tired, but the living room floor was now free of the grimy old carpeting. They decided to take a break for lunch, rummaging through the groceries Donovan had brought. They managed a simple meal of canned soup and crackers, humble but warm and filling. Mia sipped hers with contentment, occasionally sneaking a bite to Clover. After lunch, a text popped up on Grace's phone. It was from Donovan. "How did the visit with Ray go? All good?" Grace smiled, her chest tightening in gratitude. She texted back, "Great, actually. He took measurements. Might start tomorrow if finances allow. Thank you again for sending him our way." She half expected that to be the end of it, but the phone buzzed again. "Glad to hear it. Let me know if you need help with the cost. I'm serious." Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to say yes. Her bank account was worrisome, and she was desperate to get the repairs done quickly. But could she really let him pay for all this? She typed out an answer slowly. "I'll let you know. Trying to see if I can manage some of it at least. Thank you." Setting the phone aside, Grace tried to push away the swirl of feelings. She reminded herself that Donovan was simply a caring neighbor who had the means to help. Nothing more. She had no reason to suspect hidden motives, despite Trent's sneering remarks. For now, focusing on practicalities was best. The afternoon stretched on. Grace worked in short bursts, clearing piles of debris from the newly exposed floor. Mia busied herself by making "keep out" signs for the areas of the house that felt most dangerous, just in case the contractors needed warnings. Clover followed them around, occasionally chasing dust motes in sunbeams. Late in the day, as the sky turned to a soft lavender hue, a different type of knock sounded on the door, heavier, more forceful. Grace's stomach clenched. She couldn't think of who else might visit. Donovan typically texted. Alex was in class until evening. Ray Coleman had left hours ago. Dread blossomed in her chest at the possibility of Trent returning. She cracked the door open, her heart pounding, only to find a tall, broad-shouldered woman in a navy blue blazer standing on the threshold. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her posture rigid. An ID badge dangled from her pocket. Monica Hughes, family attorney. Grace furrowed her brow. "Yes?" she asked, gripping the door. Monica cleared her throat politely. "I'm here on behalf of your ex-husband, Trent Bowers. He's concerned about the living conditions for his daughter, Mia. He's retaining me to—" She paused, looking down at her clipboard. "Discuss child custody if necessary improvements aren't made." A flush of anger warmed Grace's cheeks. Another wave of interference. "We're already making improvements," she said. "CPS was here, and they didn't remove Mia. I'm not sure what else Trent thinks he can do." Monica maintained a neutral expression, though her voice held a hint of impatience. "Mr. Bowers wants to ensure that his daughter isn't subjected to potential health or safety hazards. If you can prove that professional repairs are underway and that Mia's environment is up to code, maybe we can avoid a formal custody dispute." Everything about the conversation prickled Grace's nerves. She hated that her ex-husband was intruding again, forcing her to justify every move. Still, she reminded herself to stay calm. "We have a handyman lined up," Grace explained. "Work starts tomorrow, and we're tackling the biggest problems first. Mia is safe." Monica nodded, making a note. "I see. I'll relay that to my client. But be advised, if Mr. Bowers feels the house remains unfit, he may file a motion to seek primary custody. He's determined to protect his daughter's interests." Grace's voice wavered with fury. He never protected her interests before. Now he wants to act like father of the year? Monica lifted a hand, as if to say she wasn't here to argue morality. "I understand, but I'm just the messenger." She slipped a business card into Grace's hand. "Feel free to contact me if you have any updates or questions." Then, with a clipped nod, she stepped off the porch and headed to a sleek silver car parked on the curb. The silhouette of Trent was visible in the driver's seat. Grace felt her blood simmer as the car drove away, taking the lawyer with it. She slammed the door shut, anger and disbelief swirling like a storm inside her. In the living room, Mia's eyes were wide. "Mommy, who was that?" Grace forced a shaky smile, determined not to show Mia the depth of her rage. "Just someone asking about the house repairs," she said, keeping her voice light. "Everything's fine." Yet, as she gazed at the piles of debris, the half-finished repairs, and the worn-out expression reflecting back at her from a dusty mirror, Grace knew she had little time to spare. Trent's plan was obvious. If the house wasn't livable soon, he might have grounds to take Mia away. She closed her eyes and inhaled a trembling breath. She had to act quickly, no matter how humiliating it felt to accept help, because her daughter's security, her happiness, depended on it. That night, after Mia was tucked into the sofa bed, Grace picked up her phone. She scrolled through her short list of contacts, really just a handful of numbers. Donovan's name stood out like a beacon. Her finger hovered over the call button, stomach twisting. Could she swallow her pride and ask him for a more significant loan or direct assistance? Could she bear to be indebted to him? But the memory of Trent's smug face and the child services call steeled her resolve. If Donovan's offer was genuine, it might be the fastest way to protect Mia. Closing her eyes, she pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, his voice came through low and gentle. "Grace? Everything okay?" She exhaled, pressing her free hand to her forehead. "Hi, Donovan. Sorry to call so late. I might need your help more than I realized." Her voice broke a little on those last words, but she pushed on. "Is that offer still on the table?" Silence stretched for a moment, then Donovan replied without hesitation, "Of course. Tell me what you need." And so, with her heart in her throat, Grace found herself explaining the entire ordeal. Trent's threat, the lawyer's visit, the short timeline for repairs. The deeper she went, the more Donovan listened without judgment, speaking only to confirm details or soothe her growing panic. By the end of the conversation, Grace felt both drained and relieved. "Don't worry," he said, voice reassuring. "I'll sort out the financial side with Ray. Let's get this done fast. Mia's well-being comes first." Grace squeezed her eyes shut, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I promise I'll pay you back somehow. But right now, I need to make sure my daughter stays with me." Donovan's answer came softly, yet carried a firmness that steadied her. "We'll make sure of it. I promise." As the call ended, Grace's phone slipped from her grasp onto the floor. She felt a torrent of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a raw fear of how dependent she'd become on someone she barely knew. And yet, a tiny seed of trust, perhaps even hope, had firmly planted itself in her chest. She looked over at Mia's sleeping form, and Clover curled up beside her. Tomorrow would be a turning point. Grace could feel it. One way or another, her house was about to change. The only question was whether she had truly found an ally she could count on, or if all this generosity would come at a cost she hadn't foreseen. The next morning arrived with little ceremony. Grace hadn't slept much after the phone call with Donovan, and when she finally did drift off, she dreamed of lawyers and social workers circling her like vultures. But the dawn light brought a new sense of resolve. She was done being cornered. With Donovan's promise to help, she might finally stand her ground. By the time Mia stirred, the noises of construction had already started up in the front yard. Grace had scarcely opened the door when she was greeted by the sight of Ray Coleman and 2 other workers maneuvering planks and a wheelbarrow onto the porch. A small city of tools, saws, drills, piles of lumber, occupied the once empty driveway. "Morning," Ray called cheerfully over the whir of an electric saw. "Donovan came by at sunrise to set up a payment plan. We're good to go." Grace blinked, startled. "He was here already?" Ray nodded. "Left about an hour ago. He insisted we start immediately so we can knock out the priority repairs within a few days. We'll focus on the porch and flooring first, then see what else needs reinforcement." She swallowed, a swirl of gratitude and trepidation in her chest. "I really appreciate it," she managed. Her cheeks burned, recalling the desperation in her late-night call. Donovan had followed through before she could even gather her thoughts this morning. Mia peered from behind Grace, eyes widening at the bustle of activity. The workers had set up a portable radio on the lawn, and a lively tune played as they hammered. "Mommy, are they going to make our house pretty?" she asked. Grace placed a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "They'll make it strong," she corrected with a gentle smile. "And safe." Inside, the living room buzzed with purpose. One of Ray's team members, a short but muscular man named Carlos, began marking sections of the floor with chalk lines. "We'll pry up these rotten boards and replace them with new ones," he explained. "Then we'll sand and seal the entire area. That'll keep the wood from warping." Grace watched, half in awe, half in nerves. She knew this level of professional work could be costly, far beyond what she originally planned. Donovan's involvement gave her room to breathe, but it also made her uneasy. She hadn't yet spoken to him in person since the phone call, and she wondered if he expected some kind of formal arrangement. Still, she couldn't deny that relief flooded her soul every time a rotted plank was tossed out or a supportive brace was installed beneath the porch. She told herself she'd find a way to repay Donovan, if not in money, then in some other way. That vow hardened her resolve. By midday, the workers took a short lunch break. Grace brought out a pitcher of water and disposable cups, offering them a place to sit on the steps, careful, of course, to avoid the section that was under repair. Ray wiped sweat from his brow, scanning his crew's progress. "We should have the new porch foundation set by tomorrow morning," he said. Grace set the water down, noticing the cat, Clover, ambling onto the porch. "That's amazing," she murmured. "I can't thank you enough for moving so fast." Ray shrugged off the praise. "It's all paid for, at least the initial deposit. Donovan's a generous man. We don't often get clients willing to foot the bill up front like that." He paused, seeing the flicker of tension in Grace's eyes. "You two must be close." She hesitated. "Not really. We've only just met," she admitted, cheeks warm. "He's just helping us out. I'm still trying to process it." Ray offered a kind smile. "Well, I've known Donovan for years. He doesn't do anything halfway. If he's decided to help you, I guess it means he believes in what you're trying to do." Before Grace could formulate a response, a dusty sedan rolled up to the curb. She tensed, expecting Trent's unwelcome presence, but instead, the car's door swung open to reveal Alex, the neighborhood teenager who had previously helped with small fixes. He hopped out, raising a hand in greeting. "Hope I'm not stepping on anyone's toes," he called, approaching carefully. "I saw the work starting and thought I could lend a hand, maybe with simpler tasks." Ray glanced at Grace for approval and she nodded, grateful for any extra help. "Sure," she said. "We can't pay you now, though. I'm kind of tapped out, and Donovan's covering the big stuff with Ray." Alex shrugged. "No worries. I just want more experience. I can even handle some cleanup or painting if you've got spare supplies." He waved at Ray's team, who regarded him with mild amusement but no hostility. Soon, Alex joined Carlos in the living room, carefully removing nails from old boards while the professional crew tackled the heavier tasks. Grace felt a tiny pang of guilt that a teenager and a neighbor had done so much for her. She swallowed it down, knowing that every bit of progress kept Mia safe and brought them closer to a real home. At some point in the afternoon, the unmistakable hum of a luxury SUV made Grace's heart skip. She glanced out the front window and, sure enough, Donovan was stepping onto her newly braced porch. This was the first time she'd seen him since the phone call. She braced herself, half expecting an awkward conversation. But when she opened the door, Donovan's calm smile banished her tension. He wore casual clothes, dark jeans, a fitted jacket, and carried a small paper bag. "Thought you could use a break," he said, lifting the bag. "Sandwiches from a deli I like. For you and Mia." Grace's breath caught. "Thank you," she replied softly. You didn't have to. He cut her off with a light shrug. I wanted to. His gaze flicked over the flurry of construction. Looks like Ray's making serious progress. They are, Grace agreed. She stepped aside so he could enter, ignoring the swirl of sawdust that flew with each gust of wind. We can chat in the kitchen if you don't mind the mess. Once there, she motioned for him to sit at the small table that was still missing a leg support. She and Mia had glued the broken piece the previous night, hoping it might hold. Donovan placed the bag of sandwiches down and they both sat, the noise of power tools filling the background. Mia emerged from the hallway, eyes lighting up when she recognized Donovan. Hello, she chirped, clearly remembering him from the vet trip and the groceries. Donovan smiled, handing her a paper-wrapped sandwich. Roast chicken, hope that's okay. She thanked him politely and scampered off to find some napkins. Grace folded her hands in her lap, suddenly unsure how to express her gratitude for this staggering level of help. I don't know where to start, she admitted. Covering the handyman cost, now bringing lunch. I feel overwhelmed. Donovan's expression softened. It's just money. You and Mia needed help, and I could give it. He hesitated, then added, I know what it's like to feel cornered, like you have no good options left. Her breath caught. She realized then that she knew very little about his history. She'd assumed he was born into wealth or simply lucked out with some windfall, but perhaps there was a deeper story behind his success. For a moment she wondered if it was appropriate to ask. She decided not to pry, at least not yet. Instead, she placed a hand on the flimsy tabletop. I'll pay you back somehow, she said. Not just the money. Maybe I can do something for you in return, or I'll pay in installments once I get on my feet. He shook his head gently. Focus on rebuilding your life. That's enough for me. And if one day you're in a position to help someone else, pass it on. His words tugged at her heart. Pay it forward, she echoed, letting the phrase settle over her. I can do that. Just then Mia returned, carefully setting down a couple of cups and a jug of water. Donovan unwrapped his sandwich, and Grace followed suit with hers, roasted vegetables on ciabatta. They ate quietly for a few minutes, the swirl of hammering outside reminding them that time was of the essence. Finally, Grace mustered the courage to meet Donovan's gaze. So, is it all covered? Raise fees, I mean? I saw him with a big crew. Donovan took a sip of water. I've put down a substantial deposit. I'll handle the final payment once they're done. Ray's being mindful of costs, using reclaimed lumber and reusing anything salvageable. He paused, reading the worry in her eyes. It's all right, Grace. You're not draining me if that's what you're worried about. She exhaled a laugh tinged with self-consciousness. I admit that thought crossed my mind. Her stomach twisted with a mixture of relief and guilt. But I'm beyond grateful. Their conversation was interrupted by Mia's triumphant voice from the living room. Mommy, Mr. Alex and I found something under the floorboards. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a yellowed notebook. Its cover was stained, edges curled with age. Curious, Grace excused herself and rose, Donovan following behind. In the living room, Alex brushed dust from his hoodie and handed her the notebook. We lifted a loose board to see if the subfloor needed reinforcement, and there it was, stuffed between the joists. Grace took it gingerly, her palms pricking with anticipation. The notebook had the words, Daily Journal, written in faded marker across the front. Carefully, she opened it. The first page featured a date from years ago, 2 decades back at least. The writing was in loops and swirls, reminiscent of a teenage hand. She read a few lines aloud. It's our first month in this house. Dad says it's got bad vibes, but Mom insists we can fix it up. I'm not sure who to believe. Grace's voice trailed off, goosebumps raising on her arms. Mia's eyes shone with fascination. It's like the house's diary, she whispered. Donovan hovered behind Grace's shoulder, scanning the scrawled text. Interesting, he murmured. Maybe it belonged to a previous owner's kid. Could shed light on why the place was abandoned. Grace nodded thoughtfully. We have so many questions about this house, like why it was sold so cheaply, or why no one else fixed it. Maybe this journal has answers. She carefully turned another page, the paper crackling. Before she could read more, Ray stuck his head in. We're about to do some loud drilling in here, he warned. It's going to get messy. Might want to step outside for a bit. Grace glanced at Donovan, who nodded. Want to sit on the porch steps? He suggested. We can read more without all the dust flying around. She agreed, and together they moved to the side porch, away from the flurry of saws and drills. They perched on a set of replacement boards that Ray's crew had installed as a temporary seat. Mia tucked herself beside Grace while Alex respectfully went back to clearing nails. Clover meowed from the doorway, uncertain whether to follow. Grace flipped to another page of the journal. The handwriting was shaky, as though the writer was upset. Something strange is happening at night. I hear noises from the basement. Dad says it's just pipes, but I'm scared. A small chill rippled through Grace. She'd heard plenty of squeaks and groans since moving in, but was there more to it than just old plumbing? She remembered the rumors that had circulated about the property being haunted or cursed. Of course, those could be nothing more than urban legends, but still, the words on the page echoed a truth. Someone who lived here before had felt uneasy too. Mia leaned close, wide-eyed. Do you think something really spooky happened here, Mommy? Grace forced a reassuring smile, pressing her palm gently to Mia's hair. Old houses can make a lot of noise, but we're fixing it up, remember? Maybe the ghost is just unhappy about all the change. She teased, hoping to lighten the mood. Donovan, however, studied the journal's words with a serious expression. You know, sometimes a family's troubles get projected onto a house. If they were going through tough times, the smallest creak can become terrifying. He hesitated, glancing at Grace. Still, it might be worth reading more. Could be something that explains why this place ended up on the market in such disrepair. Grace closed the notebook carefully, feeling a strange blend of fascination and apprehension. She was exhausted from so many battles. Trent, Child Protective Services, scraping for money to fix the house, and now the notion of a mysterious past layered on top of it all. One thing at a time, she murmured. A new wave of drilling resonated from the living room, followed by the rumble of boards being lifted. Mia covered her ears. Donovan placed a hand gently on Grace's shoulder. Exactly. One thing at a time. For now, let Ray and his guys handle the repairs, and we'll unravel the house's secrets later, if that's what you want. Grace nodded, her spirits buoyed by the sense of camaraderie. She had an ally who stood by her side, a curious teenager offering assistance, a cat purring around their ankles, and a daughter who still believed in the magic of a fresh start. Maybe, she thought, the negative voices, Trent's threats, the lawyer's insinuations, the old haunting rumors, would eventually fade, overshadowed by the reality of a home brought back to life. Because as the day pressed on, one thing became certain. This broken house was no longer just rotting boards and silent rooms. It was a place where people were coming together, working, laughing, uncovering lost memories. Little by little, with each hammered nail and shared sandwich, Grace felt the cracks of her old life begin to fill. And even if a few ghosts, literal or metaphorical, lurked within the walls, she now knew she wouldn't face them alone. They worked until dusk, saws whining and hammers pounding in a steady rhythm. The harsh midday sun mellowed into warm gold, spilling through the half-repaired windows and illuminating clouds of dust motes that swirled in the air. Grace felt a soft sense of wonder watching her living room transform plank by plank, layer by layer. Child Protective Services, Trent's threats, these could wait for a moment. Right now, the house itself was taking center stage. Mia drifted in and out of the construction zones, careful to stay away from the sharp tools. Her laughter occasionally rose above the drilling whenever Alex cracked a joke or pretended to battle imaginary monsters hidden under the floorboards. Even Clover ventured closer, tail swishing as the cat prowled for new hiding spots amid the upturned boards. By early evening, Ray Coleman called it quits, instructing his crew to gather their tools for the day. He gave Grace a grin as he checked his phone for the time. "We'll be back first thing tomorrow," he said. "Your new porch steps should be completely safe to walk on by then. The floor in the living room is halfway done, too." Grace's eyes shone with gratitude. "You've accomplished so much already." Ray shrugged, but a touch of pride colored his smile. "Donovan paid for a full day's shift, so we made sure to use every minute." He glanced around at the partly exposed walls and piles of lumber. "Keep the windows open if you can. It'll help clear the dust. And watch your step." She nodded her thanks, promising to be careful. Then the team clambered into their vans and trucks, headlights sweeping across the yard as they left. With the hum of construction silenced, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Grace looked over the rearranged living room. Large patches of new wood contrasted sharply with the older, stained boards. A few more days, she thought, and maybe it would look like a proper floor again. "Mommy, can I show Donovan our porch? He said he'd come see it when the steps were finished," Mia asked, eyes bright with anticipation. Grace considered the time. Dusk was deepening into night, and she wasn't sure if Donovan had his own plans. But Mia looked so eager, and Grace herself felt a surge of thanks she still hadn't fully expressed. "We can check if he's home," she agreed softly. They slipped outside, the new porch boards creaking a bit as Grace tested the freshly installed steps. They felt firm, without the wobble she'd become used to. Mia hopped down them confidently, beckoning Clover to follow. The cat, however, peered down with suspicion before deciding to remain on the porch. Across the street, Donovan's grand house sat with lights glowing in several windows. Without overthinking, Grace led Mia along the quiet road. The air held a cool promise of autumn, and a light breeze ruffled Mia's hair. When they reached Donovan's gate, Grace noticed it was ajar, as though welcoming visitors. She gave Mia a reassuring nod and pressed the doorbell set in a stone column. A soft chime echoed. Moments later, the door opened, revealing Donovan's silhouette against warm interior light. He wore a casual sweater and jeans, his expression shifting from surprise to pleasure when he recognized them. "Hey there," he greeted, stepping out onto the wide porch. "What a nice surprise." Mia beamed. "We wanted to show you our new porch. It's almost all done." A grin tugged at Donovan's lips. "I'd love to see it. Let me just grab a jacket." He disappeared briefly, returning with a light coat. "Lead the way, Miss Mia." Grace felt a trace of warmth unfurl in her chest as she watched Mia confidently cross the street, Donovan walking beside her. He asked about the day's progress, listening with genuine interest as Mia described how Alex helped, how Ray's team hammered, and how the boards smelled like fresh wood. When they arrived at Grace's house, the porch light illuminated the newly installed steps. Donovan took one step up, testing the sturdiness. "This is great," he said, nodding approval. "Ray works fast, but it looks neat, too." Grace folded her arms, taking in the subtle changes. "It's still rough around the edges, but it already feels safer." A shy laugh escaped her. "I won't lie. I'm amazed at how quickly it's come together." Donovan gazed at her, a quiet pride touching his eyes. "I'm glad it's helping. No more worry about your daughter falling through the boards or anything like that." Mia scampered up the steps, stretching her arms overhead in a victory pose. "No more wobbly porch," she cheered, drawing a chuckle from Donovan. Grace guided him inside to show the living room floor, half of which had fresh planks while the other half was still old and stained. The air smelled of sawdust. Clover trotted in after them, meowing for attention. "So, the guys will do the other half tomorrow. Then they'll sand it all down and add some sealant." Grace spoke with renewed confidence, as if she'd personally orchestrated the entire renovation. "It's a huge relief, truly." Donovan's gaze swept over the space, landing on the scattered piles of old boards. "With the floor fixed, that'll address a big safety concern," he said, echoing the fear that Child Protective Services had sparked in her. "And the porch is another huge step, literally." He caught her eye, the moment charged with unspoken gratitude and compassion. Grace felt her pulse flutter. She lowered her gaze, fiddling with a stray thread on her sleeve. "Yes, and thanks to you," she murmured, her voice subdued. "I'm sorry if I keep saying that. I never expected help like this." Donovan slid his hands into his jacket pockets. "Don't be sorry," he said gently. "I'm doing what anyone with the means should do. You're a good mother who needed a leg up." Before she could protest, he tipped his head toward Mia, who was now petting Clover in a newly installed corner of floorboards. "And you've got a wonderful kid. She deserves a safe home." A subtle wave of emotion rippled through Grace. It occurred to her that no one had ever said those words about Mia so directly. No one outside of a few close friends or neighbors. Certainly not Trent, whose definition of safe seemed to hinge on discrediting her choices. She swallowed around a lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered again. He reached out, tentatively brushing a speck of sawdust from her sleeve. The slight contact sent a surprising jolt through her. She was reminded that while Donovan was a kind neighbor, he was also a man, someone she found herself increasingly aware of, in ways that both comforted and unsettled her. But she still barely knew him. As grateful as she was, a flicker of self-protection told her to keep some distance. Before the conversation could deepen, Mia bounded up, brandishing the faded notebook they'd discovered under the floor. "We found more pages about the house," she announced. "It's kind of spooky. Want to see, Mr. Donovan?" He arched an eyebrow. "Spooky, huh? Sure, let's take a look." Mia plopped down on the couch frame that lacked cushions. Grace had tossed the moldy ones days ago. Donovan sat beside her, and Grace hovered behind them, curious as well. Clover settled on the other side, as if eager for the story. With a dramatic flair, Mia flipped to a page marked with a small red star. In a child's looping script, the writer described odd noises in the attic, footsteps at odd hours of the night, and a locked door in the basement that parents warned was too dangerous to open. The lines read, "Mom and Dad have been fighting a lot. Dad says we never should have bought this house. He's convinced the basement door is sealed for a reason. Mom just calls him paranoid." Goosebumps prickled Grace's skin. She'd barely ventured into the basement herself, mostly to store a few boxes. It was dark, damp, and she'd had no money to refurbish it yet. Could there be some hidden door down there? Donovan leaned forward, reading over Mia's shoulder. "Interesting. Sometimes older homes have sealed-off sections people used for storage or bomb shelters. It might be harmless, but the kid obviously found it frightening." "Maybe we can look for it," Mia suggested, wide-eyed with intrigue. "We can see if it's still there." Grace hesitated. "We could," she allowed, "but I'm not too keen on rummaging in a dark basement tonight. We might wait until the workers are done. I'd feel better with them around." Mia tried to hide her disappointment, but she nodded. "Okay, Mommy." Donovan rose from the couch frame. "She's right. It might be best to have an electrician check the wiring down there too, so you're not stumbling around with a flashlight in a potentially unsafe space." Grace offered a grateful look. She recognized that part of her reluctance to explore had nothing to do with structural integrity. The house's history unsettled her, especially with everything else going on. She sighed softly. "We'll find out soon enough," she added, forcing a wry smile. They continued flipping through the journal's pages in the living room's makeshift seating area. Most entries were mundane. Complaints about chores, mentions of friends, scribbles about favorite TV shows. But every few pages, the writer vented about the ominous door in the basement, growing more anxious with each mention. It culminated in an entry that read, "I think Dad's going to do something drastic. He can't sleep at night and he keeps looking at that door." Mia shivered, tucking against Grace's side. "I wish I knew what happened to them," she murmured. Donovan quietly shut the notebook. "We may never know," he said, his tone gentle, "but it seems like that family had their share of troubles. Maybe they left in a hurry." Grace nodded, her mind drifting to the notion of unfinished stories. This house had been left incomplete, a shell of someone's plans. And here she was, trying to piece her own life together amid its remnants. She felt a pang of kinship with whoever wrote those anxious lines, as if the house itself had a legacy of turmoil and restless nights. A chill crept in from the half-repaired window, prompting Donovan to stand. "It's getting late," he observed. "Mia should probably get some rest, and so should you," he added, eyeing Grace with concern. "You look worn out?" Grace managed a small laugh. "Hard not to be, living in a construction zone." He walked them both to the porch, where the new steps gleamed under a porch light. "If you need anything, let me know," he said softly, "and tomorrow, Ray and his team will keep pushing forward." "Thank you," Grace whispered, placing a hand on the railing. Mia, already exhausted, mumbled a sleepy farewell. With a final wave, Donovan turned and made his way across the street. Standing there, watching his figure fade into the growing darkness, Grace felt a medley of emotions: gratitude, weariness, an edge of excitement. The journal's hints about the basement door and the glimpses of possible secrets left behind in this house both intrigued and unnerved her. But she remembered Donovan's words, "one thing at a time." And so, after Mia was tucked into the sofa bed, lulled to sleep by the hum of night insects and the occasional rattle of a loose shutter, Grace curled up alongside her daughter. Clover found a spot at their feet. The house might hold ghosts, literal or not, but it was also brimming with new life: the pounding of nails, the scratch of saws, the laughter of a child. Slowly, the broken boards and battered walls were being replaced, and as the foundation strengthened under her feet, she couldn't help but sense that maybe, just maybe, her own foundations, those battered by heartbreak and doubt, were being rebuilt as well. Morning arrived slowly, casting thin beams of light across the half-finished living room floor. Grace lay still for a moment, the scent of sawdust lingering in the air. Mia was curled beside her, sleep-tousled hair spread over the blankets, while Clover dozed near their feet, flicking an ear whenever a stray breeze rattled the loose shutter on the window. Despite the half-renovated chaos, there was a calmness in Grace's chest, a sense of forward momentum she hadn't felt in a long time. She quietly rose, wrapping herself in a worn cardigan against the chill. The old heater still struggled to warm the entire house, but it was better than before. Stepping onto the porch, she tested each new plank underfoot. The sun's first rays lit up the fresh wood, highlighting the difference between the newly installed steps and the still-weathered siding of the house. She inhaled deeply, savoring the crispness of the early hour. A couple of Ray's workers were already outside, sipping coffee from paper cups as they unloaded more materials from their van. They waved greetings, and one mentioned that Ray would arrive shortly. It felt surreal that the cavalry of laborers was here at dawn, dedicated to patching every crack and rotted board. Not long ago, Grace had felt like the entire world was stacked against her. Now, each thump of a hammer felt like an affirmation that she, and this tired old house, were worth the effort. She headed back inside to rustle up breakfast. The temporary arrangement in the kitchen was functional enough for simple meals, so she brewed instant coffee and poured cereal for Mia. Still rubbing her eyes, Mia stumbled in, drawn by the aroma of coffee and the soft meows from Clover, who insisted on winding through her ankles. "Good morning, sweet girl," Grace said gently, sliding the cereal bowl toward her daughter. "Ready for another day of construction madness?" Mia spooned cereal into her mouth and grinned. "It's kind of cool. I like watching the house change. And the workers are nice. Carlos said he'd teach me how to sand the floor." She giggled. "If you say it's okay." Grace tried not to imagine sawdust covering Mia from head to toe. "Maybe we'll let the professionals handle the dangerous stuff," she teased. "But you can watch." Before Mia could protest, a loud knock sounded. Grace lifted her head, heart skipping. Donovan usually texted. Ray's crew was already here. Could it be Trent again? She steadied herself and answered the door. A petite young woman with dark curls and bright eyes stood on the porch. She wore a tidy blazer over jeans and clutched a clipboard with several pages attached. "Hi, I'm Alicia," she said in a chipper tone. "I'm part of Ray Coleman's team. He asked me to come by for a quick inspection of the basement before we finalize the supply list." Grace's shoulders relaxed. "Oh, of course. Welcome." She let Alicia inside, noticing how the woman's eyes lit up at the half-finished floors. Alicia approached with a quiet confidence, stepping around the debris carefully. "I specialize in structural evaluations," Alicia explained, tapping a pen on her clipboard. "Ray wants me to double-check the basement joists to be sure we don't have any hidden rot. That okay with you?" Grace nodded. "Absolutely. I'll show you the way." She led Alicia down the hallway to the basement door, an old wooden panel with paint peeling in strips. It had always felt a bit ominous, especially since reading those journal entries about a possibly sealed door or locked area down there. But she forced the worry aside and flicked on the dim overhead light before gesturing for Alicia to descend the creaking steps. The basement smelled of damp concrete and stale air. Cardboard boxes Grace had yet to unpack were stacked in corners. A single bare bulb hung from a cord in the ceiling, casting long shadows against the walls. Alicia took her time, running gloved fingers over the foundation blocks, shining a small flashlight along cracks in the mortar. Grace hovered near the stairs, arms crossed for warmth. "Is it safe enough for you to see what you need?" Alicia gave a reassuring nod. "I've seen worse. This is workable." She moved deeper into the basement, stepping over a rolled-up rug that Grace had never used. A moment later she paused, shining the flashlight on something in the far corner. "What's this?" Grace's stomach fluttered. She hadn't ventured that far since moving in. "I'm not sure," she admitted, carefully picking her way over a few scattered boxes. Mia, who had followed them halfway down the steps, peeked with curious eyes. Alicia pushed aside an old trunk covered in dust, revealing a square patch in the concrete wall that didn't match the rest. It was about knee-high, slightly discolored, as though it had been patched or cemented over more recently than the original foundation. She ran her palm over it, frowning. "Feels hollow behind here." Grace recalled the journal's reference to a locked door in the basement. Could this be it? A sealed-over door? Her heart thudded. "Maybe the previous owners closed it off," she murmured. "Why would they do that?" Alicia didn't answer immediately. She grabbed a small metal tool from her belt, tapping gently around the patch. A dull thud echoed. "If it's not too thick, we could break through, but we'd need your permission," she said. "Ray and I typically don't open sealed sections unless we suspect structural damage or there's a good reason." Mia's voice drifted from the steps. "But what if something's hidden inside?" she asked, excitement edging out her caution. Grace exhaled, mind flashing to the journal's ominous words about Dad not sleeping and believing something behind the basement door was dangerous. "I'll talk to Ray," she said at length, her voice unsteady. "We might want to open it, if only to be sure it's not affecting the foundation, but can we wait until the essential repairs upstairs are done?" Alicia nodded. "Sure, no rush from my end." She made a note on her clipboard. "I'll let Ray know that there's a suspicious patch here. If you decide to have it opened, we'll schedule the right tools and extra manpower." They climbed back upstairs, tension following Grace like a shadow. Outside, the day buzzed with the sound of new boards being cut and nails being driven in. But her mind lingered on that odd patch in the basement wall. Sealed for a reason? She tried to focus on the tasks at hand, finalizing the living room floor, ensuring the porch railings were secure. Yet every so often her thoughts drifted to the hidden corner of the basement, replaying the journal entries about a father who'd grown paranoid in this very house. She began to suspect that whatever had driven the previous family away might be hidden there, a puzzle piece bricked behind old concrete. By mid-afternoon, Donovan arrived with his usual thoughtful timing. He wore work gloves this time, apparently prepared to help carry materials if needed. Grace smiled in greeting, noticing how Mia lit up at the sight of him. After a quick update from Ray, Donovan joined Grace in the living room to see the progress. The floor gleamed in sections where fresh planks replaced the rotted ones. "It's coming together," Donovan remarked, leaning in to speak softly over the whir of a power drill. "Ray says they might finish the first coat of sealant by tomorrow." Grace nodded, trying to banish the lingering sense of unease. "They found something odd in the basement," she confessed, deciding not to hold back. "A sealed patch in the wall that might be covering a hidden door." Donovan raised his brows. "Really? Are you going to open it?" "I'm not sure." She sighed, brushing a speck of sawdust off her sweater. "Part of me wants to ignore it, let sleeping secrets lie. But the other part remembers the journal's warnings. Maybe it's best we face it head-on." His gaze was steady. "If you decide to open it, I can be there with you, in case it's more complicated than a simple sealed doorway." The offer was reassuring in a quiet way. She knew she had to be careful about leaning on him too much, but she couldn't deny the comfort of his presence. "Thank you," she said, voice soft. "I might hold you to that." They continued chatting about other parts of the renovation, Donovan occasionally stepping aside to help Ray's team move supplies. Mia trailed him, asking endless questions about the house, the cat, and whether he'd grown up around construction. Donovan answered with patience, never seeming annoyed by her curiosity. Watching them interact, Grace felt a new warmth sprout inside her. She found herself picturing a future where the house was finished, where she and Mia had a real living space, and where perhaps Donovan remained a presence in their lives. It was a dangerous sort of daydream, but in that moment, she couldn't resist it. Later, Ray announced they were done for the day. Donovan excused himself, heading home with a promise to check in tomorrow. The workers cleared out, leaving Grace and Mia with a newly floored living room that smelled strongly of fresh lumber. Alex, who had dropped by after school, gave Mia a high five before leaving, proud of the day's accomplishments. Grace and Mia settled on the sofa frame, exhausted yet content. Clover hopped up, kneading the blanket with gentle paws. Through the newly installed windows, the twilight sky glowed violet and gold. The house felt strangely peaceful, even with power tools scattered around. Every time the floor creaked, it reminded Grace that something was new and solid beneath them. Step by step, it was becoming home. She mulled over Alicia's discovery in the basement. The question of whether to open that sealed patch nagged at her. The old journal suggested something was wrong down there, something that haunted a family enough to flee, and yet ignoring it might be worse. If there was structural damage or some hidden leak behind the wall, it could jeopardize all the work they were doing. "Mommy," Mia said, breaking into her thoughts, "do you think the sealed door is scary?" Grace stroked her daughter's hair. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes grown-ups seal things off when they don't want to deal with them. But that doesn't always make them go away." Mia considered this, her young eyes reflecting a surprising maturity. "Maybe we can fix it like we're fixing everything else." The words resonated. Yes, maybe so. Grace bent and kissed Mia's forehead. "You're right," she whispered. "We'll figure it out. Together." That night, after a simple supper of canned soup, mother and daughter curled up on the makeshift bedding again. The house was quieter now, the day's hammering replaced by the gentle hum of a nighttime breeze. The new porch steps were secure, the living room floor no longer a patchwork of splinters. Outside, the occasional flash of headlights passed down the street, reminding Grace that the rest of the world kept turning. Clover nestled against Mia's side, purring softly. Grace stared at the ceiling, letting her thoughts wander over the events of the day. She found herself replaying Donovan's calm voice. Alicia's concerned expression in the basement, and Mia's unwavering optimism. For the first time, she felt that she, too, could face whatever ghosts lurked behind sealed walls, whether real or metaphorical, because she was no longer doing it alone. As she finally drifted to sleep, one image stood out, a vision of the basement patch, bright under a flashlight beam, waiting to be opened. And in that future unveiling, she saw not only a hidden door, but also a chance to break free from the fears that had tethered her. If the house was rebuilding, so was she. And nothing, no threat from Trent, no murmur of haunted secrets, would stop her from making this place her own. The next day came in a rush of footsteps and renewed hammering, the house bustling like a half-finished symphony. Grace woke with the same sense of anticipation she'd felt the night before, that something important lay just out of sight, waiting for her to take the next step. Outside, the morning sun glowed through the newly installed windows, casting patches of gold onto the freshly sanded floorboards. She and Mia shared a quick breakfast of toast and peanut butter, calling a greeting to the workers who streamed in to finish sealing the living room floor. Alex arrived soon after, offering to help tidy up any stray nails or scraps, while Ray's crew tackled the final coats of sealant. Meanwhile, Grace couldn't stop thinking about the basement. The more she tried to focus on the tasks at hand, the more her thoughts drifted to that suspicious patch of concrete. Had the previous owners truly bricked over a doorway? And if so, why? In the early afternoon, a call from Donovan cut through the clamor. Grace stepped outside onto the porch, her porch solid underfoot now, and answered. His voice hummed with quiet concern. "Hey, how's everything? Ray mentioned that Alicia found some sealed area in the basement." She exhaled, feeling a weight lift at the sound of his voice. "Yes. It's just a patch, but it looks recent compared to the rest. We haven't decided whether to open it." "Ray thinks it might be best to check it out," Donovan replied gently. "I know you're worried about the time and cost, but I'm willing to fund that exploration too, if you want it done." There it was again, his steady offer of help, unwavering as always. Grace let her gaze wander to the porch steps, where Mia was drawing a chalk mural on the newly replaced boards. She lowered her voice. "I do think we need to see what's behind it. The last thing I need is some structural hazard or a hidden mold situation that could threaten the house." "Agreed. Let me talk to Ray," Donovan said. "We can schedule a small team to open it safely, with you present if you'd like. Maybe tomorrow or the day after, once the living room is fully done." Her heart gave a little flutter at the idea of ripping open a piece of the house's sealed past, but she also felt relief. "Thank you," she breathed. "And yes, I'd like to be there." They exchanged a few more logistical details, then ended the call. As Grace pocketed her phone, she realized she was trembling slightly. She couldn't tell if it was excitement or unease. Maybe both. Either way, it felt inevitable. When she re-entered the house, she found that Ray's team had blocked off the living room with a wide strip of tape, warning everyone not to step on the freshly applied sealant. The space smelled sharply of varnish, a chemical tang that forced Grace to open the windows wide for ventilation. Alex was sweeping up the hallway while Mia hovered behind him, curious about every step. "Hey, Ms. Grace," Alex said with a smile. "Living room's off limits for now, but your floors will look awesome once this coat dries." She nodded, glancing at the glistening boards through the open doorway. "They already look better than I imagined." In the background, Clover meowed, confused about why she couldn't pad across her usual route. Grace gently scooped the cat into her arms, scratching behind its ears. "You'll have to wait too, sweet kitty." Afternoon slipped into evening. The crew cleaned up and departed, leaving fans running to help the sealant dry. Mia dashed around the kitchen, rummaging for anything that resembled dinner. Grace realized belatedly that her groceries were nearly gone. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out a shopping trip. She managed to scrape together a meal of pasta and canned sauce, which Mia ate with cheerful resilience, ignoring the dusty plastic sheeting that covered half the cabinets. Just as they finished eating, the doorbell rang. Grace felt her pulse quicken again. Donovan? Possibly. But she braced herself, remembering that Trent's lawyer had a habit of popping up at inconvenient times. Or worse, Trent himself. She hurriedly told Mia to stay in the kitchen and answered the door. A sense of relief washed over her when she saw it was Donovan, dressed in a light jacket and holding a paper bag. He smiled tentatively. "I realized you might be low on supplies," he said. "So, I stopped by the store. Hope that's okay." Her cheeks flushed with gratitude and a hint of embarrassment. "You've done so much already. But thank you. Yes, it's more than okay." He stepped inside, noticing the tape that cordoned off the living room. "Ah, right. Wet sealant. Mind if I just set these groceries on the kitchen counter?" Grace guided him around the safest path through the hallway. Mia peeked out, her face lighting up. "Hi, Mr. Donovan." He grinned. "Hello, Mia. I brought some fresh fruit, milk, a few other staples. How do you feel about strawberries?" Mia's eyes widened. "I love them," she squealed, momentarily forgetting about her incomplete dinner. She hopped from foot to foot. "Mommy, can we have some for dessert?" Grace laughed under her breath. "Sure, sweet girl." Donovan placed the groceries carefully on a temporary side table. His gaze flicked to Grace, assessing her tired posture. "Long day, huh?" She exhaled. "Every day's been long since we started renovations, but at least we see progress." He nodded. "Ray told me they can open the basement patch tomorrow or the next day if that's soon enough for you. But if you're exhausted—" "No," she interrupted softly, feeling a surge of resolve. "Let's do it. I want to know what's behind that wall." A gentle silence settled between them. Mia busied herself examining the contents of the bag, exclaiming with delight over each item. Clover wound around Donovan's ankles, meowing for attention. He crouched to give the cat a scratch under the chin. Then he straightened, looking Grace in the eye. "I'll be there," he said. "We can handle whatever we find." She mustered a quiet smile. "Thank you." Again. The next hour passed in a cozy haze. Donovan stayed for a bit, chatting with Mia about the porch's chalk drawings, listening to Grace outline her plan for the upcoming custody hearing, should Trent push it. He offered reassuring words, something about having good lawyers on speed dial if the need arose. That reminder of Trent's looming interference cast a shadow over Grace's thoughts, but it helped to know she didn't have to face it alone. Eventually, Donovan excused himself. Mia walked him to the door, wishing him good night with an enthusiastic wave. Grace felt a pang as she watched him head back across the street, the porch light shining on his tall frame. She hadn't asked for any of this kindness, yet it felt so natural to rely on him. Still, she reminded herself to keep a careful boundary. Her life was complicated enough without the risk of heartbreak. As darkness settled, Grace and Mia tidied the kitchen, then set up their sleeping area in the open hallway away from the sealed floors. The faint hum of fans from the living room lured them both toward drowsiness. Clover found a warm spot in a laundry basket, purring contentedly. Before drifting off, Grace pulled out the faded notebook once more, flipping to the last written page. The unnamed teenager's final entry was dated nearly 2 decades ago. "Dad's packing our things. We're leaving tomorrow. He said we can't stay here another night. It's not safe. Mom is furious, but Dad swears something terrible is in that basement. He tried to break down the door, but it's sealed shut. They had another fight. I'm scared we'll never come back." Grace reread those words, feeling a shiver. The father had attempted to break down the sealed door. Perhaps they'd left in haste, never returning. It explained the abrupt abandonment, though not the reason behind the door's existence in the first place. She closed the notebook, hugging it to her chest. Tomorrow they would do what that family never did: unseal the wall. A swirl of apprehension and curiosity churned in her stomach. Mia, half asleep, muttered something about finding treasure, which brought a wry smile to Grace's lips. Treasure or trouble? Either one might lie behind that patch. The night passed in fits of restless dreams. Grace found herself wandering a long corridor, each door leading to a memory of loss or fear. She saw Trent's sneer, the stern social worker's clipboard, the father's scribbled words in the journal. Then, in the dream, Donovan appeared at the end of the corridor, holding a lantern. He beckoned her forward, illuminating the path. In that moment, she felt safe, and she woke feeling strangely reassured. Sunlight returned, accompanied by the roar of trucks in the front yard. Ray's team had arrived early to finish the living room detail. By mid-morning, Alicia appeared again, with her clipboard in hand and a quiet determination etched on her face. "We're set," she told Grace. "I've got the tools and a small crew. You sure you want us to break open that patch?" Grace swallowed, exchanging a glance with Mia, who nodded vigorously, brimming with excitement. "Yes," Grace answered. "I'm sure." She sent a quick text to Donovan, letting him know they planned to start soon, then guided Alicia and two workers down the basement steps. The overhead bulb cast sharp shadows on the damp walls. Ray checked in briefly, giving instructions to his crew upstairs before joining them below. Everyone hovered near the corner where the suspicious section of concrete waited, sealed tight against decades of secrets. Mia perched on the steps, hugging Clover in her lap while Alex stood beside her, phone in hand, possibly ready to record the moment. Grace felt her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. This was it, the threshold between speculation and truth, between leaving the past buried and finally confronting it. Alicia signaled to one of the workers, who lifted a hammer drill. The mechanical whine reverberated through the confined space, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. Each impact chipped away at the patch, revealing chunks of crumbling mortar. The tension thickened, and for a moment Grace wondered if she'd made a mistake, that maybe some things were better left sealed. But then, a new sound emerged from beyond the wall, an echo that suggested an opening behind the barrier. Alicia paused, shining her flashlight through the widening crack. Her eyes flicked to Grace, a current of uneasy excitement passing between them. The hole was big enough to peer through now. With the tip of her flashlight, Alicia illuminated a space. Even from the steps, Grace could make out the start of what looked like a cramped passageway. Stale air whooshed out, carrying an odd smell of damp earth. Dust billowed, causing her to cough. Ray took a careful step closer, trying to angle his own light inside. "Looks like there's definitely a hidden area back here," he murmured. "Might be bigger than we thought." Grace's stomach flipped. Mia clutched Clover a little tighter, whispering, "Treasure or trouble, Mommy?" "Let's find out," Grace said, voice trembling but resolute. She glanced back, hoping Donovan would appear at any moment to stand beside her. But for now she had to move forward alone, or at least with the small crowd of curious workers. Alicia continued chipping away at the concrete, making the opening wide enough for a person to slip through. Dust hung in the air like a veil, lit by the bare bulb overhead. Grace inhaled, ignoring the dryness in her throat. She advanced, feeling the rough edges of the hole under her fingertips. Then, summoning the courage she'd built piece by piece ever since she'd first walked into this abandoned house, she pushed her shoulder through the gap, shining a flashlight into the darkness beyond. At first, she saw only more chipped concrete and spiderwebs. But then, in the beam of light, something metallic reflected back, a faint glint that made her pulse race. Slowly, she realized she was staring at the outline of a small steel door embedded in the wall, its surface dusty and corroded but unmistakably locked. Grace's mind spun with 1,000 questions. Why seal off a second door with concrete? What were they hiding? And as she stepped fully into the hidden passage, the rest of the crew behind her, she felt the house's old, silent burdens pressing close. This was no mere curiosity. This was the living legacy of a family's fear, a relic from a past that had nearly swallowed them whole. And now, she was about to reveal it. A hush fell over the basement, as though every dusty corner and cracked foundation block was holding its breath. Grace stood at the threshold of a cramped passageway, her heart thumping in her ears. The air inside was stale, carrying the scent of earth and metal. Behind her, Alicia, Ray, and 2 other workers clustered, flashlights in hand. Mia and Alex hovered at the top of the steps, peering down anxiously. Clover, perhaps sensing the tension, remained a silent gray sentinel, tail curled around her paws. Grace aimed her flashlight at the steel door's corroded surface. It was roughly waist-high, large enough to allow a person through if it swung open, assuming it still could. A series of rusted hinges lined the left side, and a tarnished padlock clung to a metal latch. She stepped closer, each footstep stirring clouds of dust motes. A ring of rust had stained the cement around the door's frame, as though water or condensation had seeped here over the years. Ray lifted a crowbar, glancing at Grace for permission. She gave a tight nod, her stomach knotting. The final barrier between them and whatever secret the old owners had entombed. Alicia braced her flashlight for better illumination, and the workers shifted to give Ray space. His first tug broke the corroded latch with a sudden snap, sending echoes reverberating through the musty corridor. The padlock clattered to the floor. Then he wedged the crowbar beneath the door's lip and levered it gently, letting out a grunt of effort. For a moment it resisted, as though it too refused to surrender its secrets. Finally, with a shriek of protesting metal, the door gave way, swinging inward. A damp gust of air rushed out, and everyone recoiled, coughing at the stale odor, like rotted wood and something vaguely chemical. Ray coughed and waved a hand in front of his nose. Alicia aimed her beam inside, revealing a small chamber about 10 feet deep and 8 feet wide, its walls lined with shelves that leaned precariously. Cardboard boxes, half collapsed, sat covered in mold and spiderwebs. Grace felt Mia and Alex come down a few steps, curiosity overriding caution. Ray signaled for them to wait, then stepped inside carefully. The beam of his flashlight roamed over the soggy boxes, revealing dark stains. "Watch your footing," he warned, voice echoing. "The floor could be weak." Grace's heart hammered. She followed a few feet behind him, taking each step gingerly. The floor was poured concrete, cracked in places. Water must have leaked in from somewhere over the years. Her flashlight passed over the nearest shelf, glimpsing what looked like old ledgers, maybe notebooks. Everything in here was damp and decaying. Alicia knelt to check the far wall. "No major structural damage," she murmured, relieved. "It's just a hidden storage room, I think. Probably used for who knows what." Ray carefully picked up a small box from the shelf. Its bottom sagged, and he nearly lost his grip when the cardboard gave way. A scattering of papers slid out, disintegrating edges revealing typed text. Grace shone her light, trying to read a heading. "Property transfer, 1976. She frowned, scanning further. Another slip read, "Restraining order." Another read, "Hospital discharge." Goosebumps prickled her arms. Who would store these documents in a sealed basement room? And why? She inched closer, rummaging gently through the damp papers. Most of them were personal records, outdated medical forms, legal documents regarding property disputes, old receipts. Some pages were half-eaten by mold, illegible. Others bore water damage that made the ink bleed. Yet one common name popped up repeatedly: Richards. The name of the family who owned the house before it was sold off for taxes. Alicia called from across the tiny chamber. "There's more stuff here. Photo albums, I think." She brushed off cobwebs from a battered album that had fused shut, prying it open. Faded pictures showed a man, woman, and teenage girl posing in front of the same living room that Grace now recognized, though it had once been pristine. In some photos, the father's face looked haggard, the mother's eyes wary. Over time, the pictures grew sporadic, culminating in a final image: the father standing beside the basement door, crowbar in hand. Even in the blurred Polaroid shot, his expression was haunted. Grace swallowed. This must have been the father who wrote about that ominous door in the teen's journal. Or perhaps the mother took the photo, capturing a moment of desperation. "They sealed away all their records," she murmured, voice echoing softly. "Maybe they were trying to hide something from someone." Ray pointed to a cluster of spidery black stains on the floor near an old trunk. "Could be water damage or something else," he said, looking unsettled. He tested the trunk's latch, but it was locked. Another worker pried it open using a smaller crowbar. Inside were an assortment of personal letters, diaries with the name Marilyn Richards, and more legal documents. The topmost letter bore a single sentence scrawled in pen. "We can't let them find this." Grace's mind reeled. This was clearly a family fleeing some legal or personal crisis. The father's paranoia, the mother's anger, the teenage girl's diary full of nightmares. It all converged on this hidden space. They'd locked away their secrets, literally burying them in the house's foundation, possibly to avoid detection or perhaps out of fear that the documents could be used against them in court. Mia, no longer able to contain her curiosity, stepped into the passage behind Alex. She stared at the soggy boxes and piles of papers, brow furrowed. "Mommy, this is what they left behind?" she asked, voice hushed. Grace nodded slowly. "Looks like it." She placed a protective hand on Mia's shoulder, guiding her away from the moldiest items. "But it's dangerous in here, lots of mildew. We should probably only take what might be important." Ray motioned them back toward the basement. "Agreed. Let's not linger." He turned to Grace, expression serious. "You want me to get rid of this stuff? We can bag it up, check if anything's salvageable, but it's mostly worthless or too damaged to be useful." Grace hesitated, scanning the scraps. The father, mother, and teenage daughter had clearly been in turmoil. But did anything here really matter for her own situation? Or was it simply the ghost of another family's heartbreak? "Set aside anything that looks personal or like it needs to be disposed of carefully," she decided, voice tremulous. "The rest, let's toss. They sealed it for a reason, I guess." Alicia nodded, instructing the team to come back with heavy-duty gloves and disposal bags. As they filed out, Alex lingered, filming a final look at the hidden door with his phone, equal parts excited and unnerved. Mia clung to Grace's arm, wide-eyed. "No treasure," she whispered, half disappointed, half relieved. "Just secrets," Grace said gently. Secrets that didn't help them in the end. The group moved back into the main basement, the newly chipped concrete wall behind them. Grace's mind buzzed with the swirling revelations, half-formed theories about that family's troubles. She remembered the teen's final journal entry, leaving in fear, never to return. Maybe they thought these documents were safer hidden away than destroyed, or maybe they ran out of time. As they ascended the steps, Grace's phone vibrated. It was a text from Donovan. "On my way over. Did you open it yet?" She sent a quick reply. "Yes, we found old family documents and photos. Nothing dangerous, just sad." Moments later, Donovan arrived, stepping carefully around Ray's workers. He found Grace in the hallway, taking a moment to steady herself. "You okay?" he asked softly, reading the slight tremor in her face. She offered a shaky smile. "Yeah, it's just a lot. They basically hid their entire life story down there." He nodded, guiding her to a spot away from the swirling dust. "At least it's out in the open now, not festering behind walls. Maybe you can let it go, or let the authorities handle any documents that look legal. It's not your burden." Grace inhaled, letting the notion wash over her. "You're right. I guess I was worried there'd be something that could haunt us, something physically threatening. But it's just leftover sorrow." Donovan rested a comforting hand on her arm. "Sorrow can still weigh on a place, but you're changing that story. You and Mia are giving this house new life." Her chest warmed at his words. Maybe the real curse on this house had been the ghosts of heartbreak and fear, not some supernatural threat. Now, with each new board hammered in place, each rotted plank replaced, she was purging the old nightmares and making space for something better. Even her own anxieties, Trent's meddling, the fear of losing Mia, were losing their hold, overshadowed by the tangible progress around her. Just then, Mia ran up, Clover prancing at her heels. She looked between Grace and Donovan with a bright grin. "Mommy, can we keep some of the photos for history?" she asked. "We could put them in a scrapbook so the house's old family isn't forgotten." Grace felt a pang, an odd mix of compassion for the Richards family and pride in her daughter's empathy. "That's a nice idea," she agreed, her eyes misting. "We'll pick a few, something that tells their story without keeping all the sadness." Donovan's gaze lingered on Grace, a soft smile curving his lips. In the flickering hallway light, she thought she glimpsed something in his expression, a shared understanding that they, too, were forging a new path, a path that might include each other in ways deeper than neighborly assistance. They spent the remainder of the day disposing of moldy papers, ensuring the basement corner was now properly ventilated. Ray promised to reinforce the area, sealing it again, but this time with no hidden door or secrets inside. Mia, with Alex's help, rescued a few intact photographs, setting them to dry on a spare table. One photo in particular drew Grace's attention. The teenage girl smiling despite her haunted surroundings, leaning against the living room mantel that Grace now recognized. It was a reminder that houses carry the imprints of those who came before, yet no tragedy is final. Change is possible. That evening, after the workers departed, Grace and Donovan found themselves alone on the newly finished porch steps. Mia and Alex were inside, fussing over a collage of old photos, while Clover curled up for a nap. The sky glowed with sunsets orange and pink, an echo of the subtle transformations within the house, and perhaps within Grace herself. She glanced at Donovan, words tangled behind her lips. How to express what she felt? Gratitude, yes, but also a growing tenderness. It had been only days since he'd entered her life, yet it felt like months, as though he'd been woven into her daily rhythms. She was cautious. Trent's betrayal still stung, but a soft, undeniable spark danced between them. "Thank you," she began again, voice barely above a whisper. "For everything, for seeing this through with me, for not letting me give up." He turned, leaning on one elbow. The setting sun cast warm light across his face. "I didn't do that much," he murmured. "You were the one who fought for Mia, for this house. I just helped." She exhaled, memories flooding back, the first ride to the vet, the groceries, the quiet encouragement, the unwavering support. "It's been more than help. You gave us a chance to keep this home," she managed, her throat tight. "I can never repay you fully." Donovan reached for her hand, the simple gesture making her heart stutter. "You already are," he said gently, "by letting me be part of it." The warmth of his touch eased the final guard around Grace's heart. She allowed herself to lean closer, letting her eyes fall shut momentarily. For once, she didn't think about child protective visits or rotting floors. She didn't agonize over hidden tragedies or the ghosts of ex-husbands. In that tranquil moment on the porch, as the house behind them breathed new life, she felt safe and hopeful. From inside, Mia's laughter resonated, bright and clear. Grace found herself smiling through tears. Perhaps this was the house's true treasure, revealed after all the sealed doors and hidden walls, the promise of love, of building something real from the rubble of the past. And in Donovan's steady presence beside her, she glimpsed a new chapter waiting to unfold. A story not about secrets, but about second chances, family, and the soft, radiant glow of a future they'd shape together. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.